За запрошення, дякую за прибуття. Thank you so much for possibilities to be the guest of Shevchenko Scientific Society and to have the possibility to give this presentation here. В титулі тут є цей знак запитання, чи справді так є, що мистецтво і музика можуть бути дзеркалом соціо-політичних змін. I think that we'll talk about the possibilities. Is it real that the music and art can be the mirror of different social political changes? And for beginning, I want to play two pieces from different periods of Ukrainian music history, and I want to start from with. Отже, це є звукова інсталяція групи Вербова, групи фактично молодих студентів Київської музичної академії. Що ми тут маємо? Ми маємо вільну взаємодію з простором. Ми маємо вільну волю людини в виборі, куди йти. І ми маємо справжню реакцію оточення, звукового оточення на тій людини. So, here we have a sound installation of Group Verbova. It's students from Kyiv Music Academy. And what we have here? We have the free will of person for choosing the way where the person can go, and the interaction between the person and environment, and the environment react for the free will of the person. So we have the situation like the democratic society where the person have the free will and can possibility to decide what's going on around. And another musical example which I want to show you, it's completely different story. It's a piece by Lysенka. And so it's a piece from 19th century, and it sounds like this. Дуже регулярну метрику, все в нас де дуже квадратно, при цьому, що це є прелюдія, яка би мала бути дуже романтична і дуже вільна. So we have the very structural, very square forms. We have 4 beats, no passing away from these 4 very straight beats, and everything is like a very, very square line. And this actually so this small fragment is a fragment. This piece is the piece by one of the most important in the history of Ukraine composer, Lysенka, who was one of the founder of this new modern classical school of Ukraine. He studied in Leipzig in the same period when the Edvard Grieg studied there, and he was one of these creator of the new European school of music like Edvard Grieg and other composers. And I want to play another short piece of this composer for you. And it's called the esquisse or intermezzo. So what do we have here? Here we have still the regular beats, the regular bars, but the structure of the piece is much more freely. We have a much more freedom here. And another two examples which I want to show you is the example from another famous Ukrainian composer, Vasyl Barvinsky. He is a composer who lived in western part of Ukraine. The piece, here is the piece from 1907, and it's called The Evening Side. Отже, Василь Барвінський, вечірня пісня, чудове виконання Павла Гуньки. Okay, so we have the highly intensive chromaticism here. We have the tendency to go away from the very restricted tonality, and we have the first appearance of Sprechgesang, the very special technique which was mainly developed by a new Viennese school of composers of the beginning of 20th century, which combined the speaking with melody, where there are no boundaries between where the melody ends and where the speaking or recitation starts. Here is another example of this composer. I just played a very short fragment. значно більш квадратно і так далі. So, we have, again, like very squarey thing, and you know, where all this freedom which we heard just before. And so the answer might be, okay, so maybe the pieces of the Mykola Lysenko, the first piece was when he was young, he composed the piece, and the second piece was when he was old. But here in this example we have something completely different, because the first piece was from 1907 and this piece was from the mid of 20s, so probably 1925. And there might be a lot of different examples, and also another example. So this like very different structure in the piece. For me, it was really shocking. The two pieces by Boris Latoshensky. Here is a symphony from the late 20s. Also, we have this very intense chromatic structure, free movement, full of energy, no restricted boundaries in music. And after 10 years, the same composers compose something like that. It's a shock how primitive this piece is. It's primitivism. It's something unbelievable how the same composer can compose these pieces. And like the possible answer for that, yeah. So one of the famous theorists and philosophers of 20th century, Jacques Attali, who was for many years, he was advisor of Jacques Mitterrand, the president of France. One of his famous book called The Noise, The Political Economy of Music, and the essence of this book is that how we organize, or we composers or artists, how we organize the noise and the processes in music. It's a reflection of the structure of society. And so when we start to look at this point, and through this perspective, when we start to look to the pieces which I present for you, then we understand that in the middle of 19th century, this territory of Ukraine, yes, here we have the Ukraine, almost the whole territory of Ukraine was occupied by Russian Empire, and western part of Ukraine territory was occupied by Austria-Hungary Empire. And all this empire was monarchies, where all the structure all the peoples are in fact the slaves of the one emperor. And here we have the very clear reflection in that the structure of the pieces are very restricted, and also we have the domination of one tonality. No chromaticism, no going away from this one very restricted tonality. But when we talk about Vasil Barvinsky from 1907, at that time Austria-Hungary already started to there was still the empire, but the emperor was a person about which everybody can make the jokes, and there was a lot of very funny cartoons about the emperor. And so it's something unbelievable in Russian Empire that anybody before 1910 or 1914 start to present the emperor this way. Go back to Vasil Barvinsky. We have 1907, and Vasil Barvinsky start to compare the Sprechgesang, start to use a lot of chromaticism and so on. But why he changed so radically his musical style? After 1918, so there was a Ukrainian National Republic and Western Ukrainian National Republic, and Western Ukrainian National Republic was occupied by Poland, and actually till the 1924, something like that, everything was probably okay. But starting from the middle 20s, the Poland became the more and more like ultra-right, what we now call the ultra-right state, with a lot of pressure for minorities and with very close structure of the society. And immediately we saw it in the pieces of Vasyl Barvinsky, the changes of the freely musical, perfumed atmosphere to very simple, very stricted 4-beat structure. And when we talk about these pieces by Boris Latushinsky, we have the same. So in the 20s, when already the Ukraine was occupied by Soviet troops, but at that time, in this newly pure Soviet Union state, there was a period which called the new economical policy or something like that. So it was in fact the period of free society and free market. But after 10 years, situation changed rapidly. So on the beginning of the 20th century, we also have this, like the huge explosion of the new modernist art, also in visual arts. We have Alexander Archipenko, who experiment with this like different 3D types of not only the sculpture, but the mixture between the sculpture and the visuality, like this archipentura, where we had the canvas which moved all the time, and all the time the picture was different. We have the experiment with different colors by Alexander Bohomazov, by Alexandra Ekster, Issachar Rybak, Mikhailo Andrienko-Nechitailo. So we have a really explosions of these experiments with freely combining colors, textures, forms. But how about music? In music we have the same. We have in Western Ukraine, except of Vasyl Barvinsky, we have the Joseph Kofler, who was a dodecaphonist who worked in this dodecaphonic structure. Maybe the short explanation for those of you who are not, for whom it's a new term. So when we have the tonality, we have all the time going back to the main tonality. We have, and again we go back to this main tune. But in the beginning of 20th century, composers decided, no, why we want to build the democratic society when everybody are equal. So why we need to still use tonality when the one note is more important than other? Let's use all the 12 notes completely freely. And then we have this dodecaphony style when so we have the very intense structure where all the notes are equal. And immediately in the Western Ukraine and the period of between 1910 and 1925, we have few composers who experiment with this new type of structuring musical pieces. One of them was Joseph Kofler, and another was Stefania Turkevich. Also, it's very important, the first time in the history of Ukrainian music, women composers appear. And actually it was very interesting because at that time was very few women among the composers and musicologists, and especially among the avant-garde art. And she was also the composer who worked in the field of dodecaphony music. And actually she studied with Arnold Schoenberg in Vienna, with composers who are creator of this dodecaphony type of music. But how about the Russian Empire? How about this territory of Ukraine which was occupied by Russian Empire? So there we have the Mykola Roslavets. actually very few people know about this composer, but he combined in his music these new tendencies, and we have the highly intense harmonic structure and 10 notes rows in his pieces. So we hear how intense the emotion is here, and it's completely uncomparable with other pieces from the era before. And what's going on in Russia in the 1913, 1914? The Tsar, the Russian emperor, he started to lose his power. And you know, Russia was on the beginning of the participation in the First World War, and all the structure of the society started to fall down, all this very restricted structure. And then, even in 20s, the Yuri Matus, all of Ukrainians here definitely know the Yuri Matus, the famous socio-realistic, so social realism composer from 40s, and his operas full of brave communists and very simple and very strict structure of the music. But in 20, the Yuri Matus was really one of the leader of avant-garde movement, and he composed this symphonic poem na Dnipro Stani, which was on the building of Dnipro Water Power Station. And this piece by musicologists in the 20s and in the 30s was called one of the best urbanistic pieces which was composed, and this piece actually was recorded by Columbia, and here you can see this label from the disc, the Columbia disc. And so go back to, now we want to go back to all these two famous composers from 20 from Ukraine, the Boris Tushinsky and Levko Revutsky. And actually both of them almost stopped to compose anything in 30s. And even if they compose this very primitive music. So what's going on? You know, Red Terror. So there's this terrible period. All the Ukrainians here know this. We have from 4 to 7 million people killed in this great famine. Then, you know, almost 1 million people killed, who was all the people who were like the academic professors, poets, artists, musicians, and of course through the 20 years almost 5 million imprisoned in this huge network on concentration camps all over Siberia, which called Gulag. And let's look on the music. Claude Debussy, the famous French composer from the late 19th, beginning of 20th century, was completely cut from the program of the schools, of the college, and there was a lot of situation when the people who studied in musical schools and colleges before 1954 even doesn't know that the Impressionism exists, and it was like the 50 years before. And what is very interesting that immediately after this period we have the next huge explosion in visual art. But what is most important, the next huge explosion in the avant-garde music. And we have this famous Kiev avant-garde group, and actually it's a great pleasure that one of the most important members of this Kiev avant-garde group, Leonid Grabowski, is here. And it's really a fantastic what such composer as Leonid Grabowski, what they did at this time, at 60s. And I want just to very quickly present a few of these pieces of these composers. So let's go to music by Leonid Hrabowski. So it's a piece which called Constance for 4 pianos, 6 group of percussion instruments and solo violin. And it's really fantastic. We have like the floating over the different sound and noises. And we have here very important things. We have the incorporation of the noises from percussion instrument into the structure of musical piece and into the structure of the texture. Actually, this piece, for me, it's one of the most genius pieces in history of Ukrainian music, and it's very brilliant example of sonorism, one of the very important events in the history of European music, which was in the 1960s. And when we listen to this piece, or to piece by other member of Kyiv Avant-Garde School, Valentin Silvestrov. Floating of the different structures and different textures, and you know, it's okay, what's going on? It's still the Soviet Union, and suddenly after this like really very square type structure of the pieces, we have such beautiful, full of freedom, floating of over the different musical textures and musical structures. And also another piece, another member of the group is Vitaly Hodzatsky, and here we have the piece for study for tape. So the composer started to compose the piece on the magnetic tape. And so we have the completely new medium in the music. And what's going on? And so when we start to try to reconstruct, we feel that this music, it's going out of the very restricted structure but also there are this atmosphere of uncertainty. Something, something may happen completely unexpected. And when we look on the period in the history, it was actually the period of Khrushchev too. And it began from in the 54, and actually the Khrushchev even twice he visited United States. And it was period of the starting the completely new structure, political structure of the society, which actually Václav Havel in his essay Powerless called the new type of post-totalitarian society. And actually in this society, in 99%, nobody just killed people like in Nazi Germany or Soviet Union during the Stalin period, but there was still totalitarian era. And there was this short period of freedom, and immediately composers start to reflect this freedom in their pieces. And it was only for a very short period. Because when the Khrushchev tour stopped, actually all the possibilities for composing freedom music was also stopped, and actually also the the part of the Ukrainian avant-garde composers was fired from the Union of Composer of Ukraine, and actually, as I remember correctly, the one of the among this text was there was traitors and stamps of their notes are pointed to the west. Було таке, пане Леоніде?
То була промова пана з Білорусі, такий був Григорій Ширма.
Ось.
Ось то він сказав таке.
Like the composers was justified from Union of Composers, and what is really very important here, and actually the Leonid Hrabovsky, I'm sure you talk in a lot of interviews about that, about the having no possibilities to going from the acoustic music to electronic music and use different studios of electronic music. And what we have is very interesting. When we look on the map, the using of noise here in the pieces, in the Constance or in the Mystery, we have a very intensive use of percussion instruments, a very intensive use of noises. But except of Hodzatsky, who experimented with tape, we have no electronic media. But when we talk about noise, and noise is one of the most important things in the creation of electronic music. The first studio of electronic music appeared in 1948 in France, and it was created by Pierre Schaeffer. And the next studio was created in Germany. It was a studio of Westdeutsche Rundfunk, and it was in 1953, and for many years the famous German composers were there, and in 1955 the studio in Italy emerged. So we have that the first studios of electronic music appear in the free democratic country in western part of Europe. Yeah, it's from Milano, and actually at the same time the first huge computer was installed here in Columbia University, and the purpose of this computer was to produce computer music. And then the first studio appeared in the country of the Poland, at that period was part of this socialistic camp. And it was the experimental studio of Polish radio from 1957. It's what's going on in Soviet Union. Well, in Soviet Union, the first synthesizer was built in 1958, and actually it was not a real synthesizer. The ANS was some kind of tricky things. The Leon Theremin, the creator of the theremin, start to work after a lot of years in concentration camp in Siberia. He started to work in Moscow Conservatory, but it was really very short period. And almost after a few months after the opening of this studio, he was fired from the Moscow Conservatory, and actually this studio was almost destroyed. And you know, for many years there was nothing in electronic music except the music for movies or for radio show in Soviet Union, and especially in Ukraine. And there was just a few pieces for this ANS synthesizer by Schnittke, by Gubaldurina, and by Artemiev, and that's it. And almost no pieces for electronic music among Ukrainian composers. And only Alexander Szczepiński in 1991 composed his near entrance in Studio for Electronic Music of Krakow Music Academy. And what's the problem with that? And when we go back to the Jacques Attali, at the same book, he wrote about the noise. The noise, as you know, when we talk about acoustical term of noise, so the noise is the completely equal spread of acoustical energy among the whole spectrum. So the pitch, if the concentration of acoustical energy around one particular frequency, but the noise is the spread of this energy all over the spectrum, and it's somehow very related to the situation in this type of society which is still totalitarian, but not so extremely totalitarian like during Nazis or Stalinistic period, but where all the possibilities are just hidden underneath, under the texture, under the ground. And for all the totalitarian regimes, Jacques Attali told about that. They have fear about free experiment in art and free experiment in music, and they have really fear about using noises, because noise have the extreme potential of energy in structure. And when we saw on this point in the history of Ukrainian music, we see, okay, that only when the Ukrainian have the independence at 1991, the Ukrainian composers start to use electronic music and start to compose pieces full not even of noises, but full of different structures, not only sonical but also visual structures. So here we have the recording of the performance by Alla Zahakevich. She was a founder. She is the founder of the first electronic studio in Ukraine, She studied in IRCAM, in the famous Center for Electronic Music in France, in Paris, and yeah, in 1996 she established the Studio of Electronic Music in Kyiv Music Academy. And very important is when you look at the new generation of Ukrainian composers, you have a lot of names, and all these composers use electronic music as a medium. So we have like the new step in the history. At the middle of 20th century, we have incorporation of noises produced by acoustical instrument into the structure of the piece. And only after the independent country appear and Ukrainians start to movement from the post-totalitarian society to free democratic society, especially after the Revolution of Dignity 2013-2014, a lot of composers start to use electronic music as a main medium of their creation. And what is really very important, that the new studios start to emerge all over the territory of Ukraine. So we have the very important process of institutionalization of the underground free avant-garde movement into the really powerful and full of energy institution. And this is a photo from our Lviv studio of electroacoustic music, which is usually full of people, where the two huge festivals of electroacoustic music are organized, where a lot of people from all over the world come to visit. They have a lot of workshops there with students. And why I'm so optimistic about that and about the possibility of development of avant-garde music? Because when we look at this graph, it presents the GDP per person, per citizen. So we actually have the structure, how the society became the rich. And when we compare the starting point of these lines, which going up in Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, so all the country where we have the very intense modernistic movement, and very intense like the expressionism, late romanticism movement, and tendency for experiment, all these countries show that at the same time they have growing economy. And it's a really very interesting correlation between the tendency of the artist to produce some experimental art and the tendency of the society to become more freely, more democratic, and more rich. And for the end of my presentation, I want to show you one short video. From Lviv Music Academy. So imagine the conservatoire, because it's for Lviv Music Academy is a new name. For a century and a half it was a music conservatory. So the institution, which even in name have the something which is very established and very restricted. And only after the Revolution of Dignity, the structure of the relations between this new department of electronic music and the students changed completely the whole structure of Music Academy. And can you imagine that at night, sometimes we organize there some happenings. And, oh, sorry. So, and here we have the recording of the happening where the students build their own oscillators, and these oscillators are combining with photoresistors, so they change the pitch depending on the light. And musicians musicians was all over the music academy, sitting on the corridors, and all the peoples have the possibility to come at night to music academy at the middle of night and just to have their own sound walk. So they have the free will to go to the right, to the left, up or down, and as a result they change their own structure of this free musical composition. The one student sitting is just having fun with these photoresistors. Yes. So and the last question: can music be a mirror of socio-political changes? Дякую за увагу.